This is a picture of the Upbeat Beatles, a tribute band, performing the song Revolution. The lyrics of that song make 5 points that I'm going to apply to organisational transformation. Let's see how I get on. So first of all, we all want to change the world. And whenever I've joined colleagues, postdoc colleagues, I think that's something we all have in common. We do want to change the world. And I don't know if any of us believe that doing a degree will help that, but certainly we have a thirst for changing the world. So when I look back at my achievements, the things that I've noticed that have made an impact on the world were the Agile Manifesto. So that was, as a software developer, adopting Agile methods, very much the philosophy of the manifesto, helped me to develop better software and find better ways of doing it and to help others. And I was very much learning by doing. I was teaching what I'd learnt in class. I taught Agile development techniques. But I was also using that in context with, sometimes with the people that I was teaching, but very often coaching in context. And as a consequence of that, I was hired by TfL to help them develop software. They'd never developed software before, so it was transformational in the sense that I helped them get a product from scratch into market, their own market, so they were operating themselves. That's transformed quite a lot. It's certainly transformed the mass transport industry because we pay now by contactless card. Well, the contactless card was transformational as well, and we brought those things together. And now Transport for London licensed that IP and they sell that system into other countries around the world. So that's clearly been transformational. We changed the world in that respect. And it made me an agile coach. So I was able to offer my experience to other organizations that wanted to get the benefits of agile. That was a job that never existed before, so that was another transformation. What companies are trying to do is they're buying transformations, either agile transformation, which generally means they want to be better, cheaper, faster in their ways of working, and they want to perhaps get to market quicker or change what they're producing more quickly. It's an efficiency play. And the other one is digital transformation. Luckily, there's a bit more literature on digital transformation, which is a shift to value that's being delivered through digital means, which of course is cheap. It's free, virtually free. More cynically, you could be seen as jumping on the digital agile bandwagon. The problem with all of this as a transformational industry is there's no real consensus or definition of what agile means. The term scaling agility was introduced in around about 2007 by the founder of what has now become one of the big models for scaled agile. But unfortunately, there's no evidence that that really can be applied in general across organizations. And in fact, there was a very recent study of agile transformation, and there was only 19 different cases that they found that were truly attempting transformation. And not only that, but when you see this actually comes from Holt, and obviously they'd like people to come along and learn at their MBA programs. But when you look at the advice, they talk about flattening the hierarchy and giving away power and control or building a culture. And I would challenge all of those three things. I don't think any of that's doable. W. Edwards Deming had a famous, he used to ask, how do you expect to do that? And that's really the gap in the literature as far as organizational transformation, is there's a shortage of what's the method, how do we do this? And as an agile coach, as a management consultant and mentor, that interests me because that's really what people want to do. So I found a very rich vein of literature, and it's based around this, and it's based around attention in all organizations, which is you have to invent new stuff and you also have to get the profits back from the things that you've invented. Now, James March 1991, highly cited paper, called this exploiting old certainties and exploring new possibilities. The terminology is unfortunate, especially as we see that now throughout the literature. But essentially it's all about this. It's all about you need to increase variety. You need lots of diversity and lots of different ideas. This was Rita McGrath tied this back to variety. The variation gives you ideas, but reducing variety is what gives you operational efficiency, as Henry Ford kind of introduced, the mass production model. You're reducing the variation. And that field is ambidexterity. It's an academic construction or an academic observation of the phenomenon that firms do these two things. They both innovate and they also reduce variety in order to exploit these old certainties. And within that, of course, you've still got the improvement. You've got ideas that will improve, and you're building on existing knowledge and getting better at that. But also you've got this idea that at some stage you're going to have to walk away from the things that have worked for you in the past. And one of the famous examples is the valve industry, which was destroyed by transistors. So the lyrics of the song go like this. You're asking me for a contribution. Well, we're all doing what we can. And I find this is very much the way that managers are. So management has been built up around this idea of scaling organizations, growing them. And that means that we are in functional silos. And what happens is, as the need for transformation is picked up and sponsored, it gets handed to a head of transformation. They get a budget, and you've built a new silo. So this is what happens in organizations. Now, March with Leventhal this time, 1993, they wrote a paper about myopia, short-termism. But they also explained why these silos exist. There is specialist knowledge. So we do need to have the specialist knowledge, and that does mean that people form these tribes and disciplines. That's sort of inevitable, but it then creates complications for coordination across those. And that's really where ambidexterity comes in. Is ambidexterity says, look, however you've constructed these different specialties, you have to be able to integrate them together. Deming was very critical of this. He criticized managers for their sort of short-termism. But what we're seeing is a different type, or a recognition that there's a different type of ambidexterity where everything happens in context. So the change that has happened is the digital revolution, and we see new tech firms or even science institutions where there's less hierarchy and much more collaboration. So radical collaboration, but it's all about that. It's about sharing the resources of our knowledge together. So we move away from a top-down solution. Strategy is invented at the top and handed down. We move away from that sort of resource-based view of the firm in which everything is predetermined, and the last thing that you want is anybody to change the processes because they've already been optimized. And we move much more towards this complexity, this adaptive model, whereby everything is emergent. We don't know what the solutions are. They're not really predetermined. Some great stuff is just going to emerge if we keep on collaborating and innovating. And therefore strategy becomes an emergent thing, probably ground up. And there you want managers to be the enablers. Now, the absolute best example that I can think of in terms of ambidextrous practice in context is DevOps. Now, when I was a software developer, I would release software and I would release it to the operations team. And that was, they didn't like it because that meant change, and change was instability. So there was this tension. Actually, sometimes it was conflict. There was a real animosity between development and operations teams, different silos, sometimes called run and change. And with the DevOps practice, which is backed by really good theory, the book called Accelerate, Forsgren et al., and Dora, the DevOps research, this has shown and explained how this collaboration works. And it's really compatible with this idea of contextual ambidexterity, whereby managers set the expectations that we're going to be both good at developing new software and introducing it into the production environment. And the latest DevOps research, State of DevOps, is showing that high-performing DevOps organizations are able to release software 6,500 times faster, more often than the low performers. And the small print that you can't quite read says, yeah, that's not an editorial mistake. It's really that much faster. But also they have a third fewer problems, incidents. And when they do have an incident, they can fix it. They can get the fix into production 6,500 times quicker, right? So this is very much, TTR is time to recovery. This is very much high performance, smart people doing the right things, working together. And you've got these goals that are seemingly or have previously had been in conflict, and now we're just saying, no, this is what we want. We want a highly reliable environment, and we want an environment that can change very quickly. So DevOps is a really great example of how this practice is contextual ambidexterity in practice. And then we look at the institution that is Western management, and it's really reductive. It's all about either or. I'm either going to do this, build or buy, agile or plan driven. And we use the word mindset. In fact, the agile people talk about, so-and-so has or has not got an agile mindset. Well, mindset is a set mind. We want thinking. And the paradox literature brings about this, introduces this idea of paradox, both and thinking. And Smith and Lewis, their paper won an award. In fact, they've recently published a book about both and thinking. And, it's very much this idea of moving tensions. You need both this and that. And every time we see a tension, what we've got is an opportunity for improvement. And that's what I did, was I went back into the literature and I looked at where are these tensions. And some of them were paradoxical and some of them were ambidextrous. But for me, I was interested in where is the tension, because if you've got a tension, then you may be able to have a conversation and improve it. So I found lots of different tensions, and some of them fell into this idea that one is, increasing the efficiency of what we already do. Others were about increasing our ability to explore, which you also want to do efficiently, of course. I boiled them down. I did a thematic analysis. And this is what I came up with, is instead of managing resources, so remember the resource-based view of the firm, managers are managing the tension between exploration and exploitation, and they normally do that by balancing. They're actually very good at this naturally. They naturally balance all of these demands. They connect to all of the stakeholders, so they're balancing. But they're also balancing or managing, variation and routine. Now, this is where Deming in the 50s, 60s, 70s did a lot of work about understanding that there is natural variation in every process. So if you look at the performance of anything, there will be a band statistically where the variation is likely to occur. And you can see that in stock markets, and you can see that in all sorts of things. And what he taught is that there's no point in trying to manage that. Don't change the system, but let it vary within that range. But when it exceeds those ranges, then you need to take action. You need to go and understand what has caused that variation. Now, this is well established and it's quite solid, and there's some work in the NHS around this as well, but it's not commonly taught to managers. I identified this one being an agile coach. I'm interested in agility or adaptability, I've called it. You want to be stable as well as adaptable, so you both want, you want change and you want agility. And the way to do that, I've conceptualized, is by developing leadership at all levels, allowing people to make the choices, the right choice for the organization. And that includes speaking to managers and enabling them as well. So instead of waiting to get permission from their level above, is making decisions themselves. The next one is the intention execution. very often see organizations overload people simply because it seems okay to just increase demand by another 5%, just do a little bit more, stay a little bit longer, take a bit more. And managers very often work late. They've got so much work to do that they're taking it home. They're taking that work home to do after hours. This is all about the capacity, because we're not dealing with machines anymore where you can see there's a meter or a rev counter or something where there's a red line. Because it's people, it's harder to see where that capacity limit is. But in fact, if we empower the people that are working in the process, if we show them what the work in progress limit looks like, then of course they can self-manage that, and they can say, well, at the moment the process is full, we don't have capacity, but we'll put it back in the queue. In Lean, this is sometimes known as pull, not push. So you pull work into the process rather than pushing work in. And that's very much a different mind, a different way of thinking about managing a process. Is when the process is ready to take on more, it will, rather than telling the process it has to do something. And then finally, and this comes directly from Taiichi Ohno, who developed the Toyota production system. This is about the difference between illusion, we've always done it this way, or mass production is good, and reality. And he was all about, let's run an experiment and find out. Let's see what the real difference is here. So the collaboration that I'm talking about happens in context. Yes, it's contextual ambidexterity, but it's all about finding tensions. And this uses the concept of adaptive spaces, which we see in the coaching literature, and also complexity and leadership for adaptability. And what I'm saying is that the answer to how do we improve our organizations is this, is we invite managers to create the conditions for success by creating adaptive space and by finding the tensions, amplifying those, and inviting the conversation around that tension. So I'll finish up with a quote from a very funny comedian, which is, just learn to adapt to the gaps in your knowledge rather than trying to fill them. So in other words, managers aren't there to solve people's problems and tell them what to do, but to create that adaptive space. So the revolution that the Beatles were part of in the 60s, there's still going on. There's still a revolution, and it's always going to be all right.